Hello, welcome to another episode of Node Spaghetti. My name is Joseph, and this is Making an Octopus in Blender 2.81. There she is. Now at this point I actually thought I was done modeling, and I went on to work on the UVs for the model. But I started to notice some problems. First of all, the topology was pretty bad on the siphon, so I had to fix that while I was UV unwrapping it. And secondly, I didn't realize this at the time, but there's actually only one siphon on an octopus's head. I found that out when I showed the model to a bunch of my friends, and then they all started laughing at me. Which is pretty much par for the course when I show my work to people. And finally, I just wanted to add suction cups to the octopus to make things hard on myself, I guess. Originally, I wanted to fake the suction cups using dupliverts, and I will do that at some point in this series just because I wanted to make a low-poly version of the model. But I couldn't let a challenge like that pass by me. I had to do it. And it actually ended up being really difficult to do, not on the tentacles, but actually on the body of the octopus. Anyhow, right here you can see how the bad topology is giving me a bunch of trouble while I'm trying to do the UV unwrapping here. And that's because the square faces loop around on themselves and create those ugly spirals, which are one of the worst things you can do when you're modeling. I left it like that at first because I was being lazy, but there's no excuse for being that lazy. I need to fix it now. Instead of creating these ugly spirals, the topology should be a closed loop. And anyways, this whole section was pretty easy to fix, so no harm done. Recently, I've been doing a bunch of modeling in Maya for another project. I do all of my personal work in Blender because it's just the better tool, but I've been having to use Maya, and it's just amazing how, even though I'm still good at modeling because I've been doing it for a long time, I work so much slower because the tools are just slow. I have to use a menu to get to all of the different modeling operators, and I have to use those freaking widgets on screen and click and drag, and it's just a bad way to work. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I want to compare it to this tool that I'm using right here, which is the two-sphere operator. Now you might think, why bother adding an entire tool just for taking a bunch of vertices and making them into the shape of a sphere? When are you ever going to use that? But, as it turns out, it was exactly the perfect tool that I needed right there. And the great thing about Blender is even an obscure tool that you use once in a blue moon, like to sphere, has a hotkey. So just about everything you ever want to do in Blender you can get right away, and you don't have to use the mouse and drag stuff around, and you don't have to break your momentum to find something in a menu. Now I actually did use the menu, and that's just because I didn't know the hotkey. Incidentally, the work that I've been doing in Maya involves some pretty cool rigging stuff that I hope I'll be able to show on this channel. I don't personally own Maya, but I'll find a way. And of course, just as soon as I can, I'm going to be porting it into Blender, and then I'll show you how it works. Anyhow, I don't really have a secret technique or anything for laying out the UVs on a character. Most of the work is actually done in modeling it. If you just model the character well, then UVing it is a simple case of cutting the big shapes out and stitching them together. In this case, I'd always planned for the whole bottom of the octopus to be one UV island, so that works out pretty well. The head, on the other hand, took a bit more figuring out, but I'm pretty happy with the solution that I came up with. And I painted on it, so I'm stuck with it now. Anyhow, these past couple of weeks I've been feeling pretty uninspired. I'm a little bit overwhelmed by all of the other work that I've gotten myself into, and I've been having a hard time coming up with things to talk about for 10 minutes at a time. It's almost hard to believe how 15 minutes of material can be squashed down into about 3 minutes worth of time just by removing all of the uhs and the ums and the dead air from the long pauses between words. So, this week I want to talk about some of the things that I do when I'm not feeling inspired to try to get back up on that horse. You can think of this as a sort of part 2 to the last episode, since it touches on a similar subject. Often, when I lack inspiration, I drag my feet around and I procrastinate. My usual mode of behavior is to avoid stressful situations, and there's almost nothing worse than knowing I'm capable of creating all kinds of cool things, but not having a clue what to do or where to start. My skills are all aimed at one goal, which is to create pictures, or to make little characters move around on a screen. If I don't have a picture to work on or a little character to move around on a screen, what good is all the time I've spent developing these skills? But it turns out that's actually a backwards way of looking at things. The skills are actually developing me. After all, I only feel inspired a small minority of the time, and inspiration is such a mysterious concept. Is it a feeling? A revelation? An illusion? Can it be forced? Or lost and then found again? It would be foolish to waste the very temporary rush of inspiration, trying and then failing, to realize the idea in my head. It would be far better if I could just rush headlong into making as soon as I know what I want to make. The ideal solution would be to work exactly as fast as I can think, to make creation as effortless as imagination. So, in between periods of continuous vivid ideation and droughts of intellectual flaccidity, it's irresponsible for me to simply remain passive. But how can I create anything when I don't have any good ideas? Here, as in every other situation, I turn to the most mighty of tools, the list. The stupid thing about inspiration is that it strikes anywhere, and it might be at the most inconvenient times. Maybe I'm out shopping, or I'm sleeping, or I'm working on something already, and I can't just drop the project I'm working on and pick up the new one. So what I always do in these situations is I write down the good idea that I've just had, or maybe I even do a quick concept sketch, and I keep all of them in a list somewhere, and then I sort them by how much I want to do them, or how hard they would be to do. Then, when I'm in a rut and I'm feeling uninspired, I can just pick one of those ideas up where I left it off. Even if the idea at the top of the list isn't all that exciting to me at the moment, it's a productive way to waste my time while I'm between projects that I really care about. Sometimes it's actually easier to produce good work when I don't care about the project, because I don't waste my time agonizing over the best way to do things, since all I really need to do is just finish the damn job already. There's no stress or anxiety suffered over whether the decision I'm about to make will cause problems or do-overs later on down the line. There's no opportunity cost to committing to one design or another, because I'm not trying to outdo myself or anything, I just want to finish. But if I'm working on a job that once excited me enough that I had to write it down in the middle of the night while I'm trying to sleep, well, chances are, once I start working on it, I'll get excited about it again. Anyhow, at this point, I've decided to go ahead and remodel the tentacle for what's gotta be the 20th time. I've decided at this point to add the suction cups directly to the model, instead of just faking them using dupliverts. And so I need to refine the shape of the tentacle before I start adding a bunch of stuff to it and making it hard to edit the shape later on down the line. Since, after all, once the suction cups are there, I'm going to have to move all of the new vertices of the suction cups along with the old vertices that define the shape of the tentacle, and that's just too much work. My strategy for modeling the suction cups was to start by just creating one of them, and then getting the shape right and duplicating it a bunch of times to figure out the spacing, as you can see here. Once I was happy that it looked like there's the right number of suction cups and the right shape, then I decided I would figure out how to connect them to the original existing geometry. The added advantage of this part is it creates a nice little bump on the side of the tentacle, which I never really planned to do, but it ended up looking really cool, and I'm just really happy that I ended up doing that. Right here, this is what I'm talking about. The faces that I added right there add a little bump on the side of the tentacle next to every pair of suction cups, and you'll see that in a second. Now, I'm UV unwrapping the suction cup because I'm going to be copying and pasting it, and I don't want to have to do this for every single one because it'll end up being inconsistent no matter how hard I try to keep them the same. So, by doing it once, then copying and pasting it, I'm making it even more consistent, and I'm also making it so I only have to do it once. And finally, now that I've copied and pasted everything, I can just start sewing them together. And right about here, you can see those little bumps I was talking about on the side of the tentacle. Don't they look nice? Sometimes it's not clear to me what task I should be working on between passion projects, or all of the items on my list just leave me with a feeling of nothingness, and I can't do anything creative at all. When I'm feeling this way, I usually try one of these two strategies. First, to try and brute force my way through the generation of new ideas, or second, to do something completely different and unrelated for a little while. This first strategy is the right choice when nothing else will work, and the root cause of my block isn't merely a lack of interest, but the big wall of anxiety that I've built up because I'm so overwhelmed by the task. You know, one of those situations where the stakes are so high because I'll lose my job, or people will see just how much of a fraud I am when I do it as badly as I think I'm going to. In times like this, sometimes it's necessary to just force myself through the block by using the same strategies that I would when I'm procrastinating. Procrastination is, after all, just another form of anxiety avoidance. And of course, sometimes the solution is just to be a little tougher and just buckle down and do it. But sometimes the reason I'm out of ideas is a simple lack of that mysterious thing called inspiration. It's not something I can force, but it is something that can be enticed. And oftentimes, the enticement that inspiration needs is for you to quit looking for it. Play hard to get. Even if you're in the middle of a tight deadline, just walk away and do something else for a little while. Sooner or later, the muses will become jealous and call your attention back to themselves. Usually what I do is I pick up my guitar and start playing some music. That's a good way to stay creative while changing things up a little bit. Other things that I like to do is go out and take a walk or take a shower. And if I was smart, I'd use the time to get some exercise. That can be really, really effective. Other things to do with the time are chores like dishes and laundry and cooking, cleaning up. It typically doesn't help me to watch TV or read a book or anything sedentary. It's best if I'm doing something that causes me to move around. Keeping myself locked up in my room isn't a good idea anyways, because the kind of ideas I want to have are ideas that other people can relate to. So sometimes I'd do something like leave the house and go shopping and force myself to interact with new people. The benefit of taking these kinds of breaks is that when I'm successful at coaxing up inspiration, I often have different kinds of ideas than I would have normally, because I'm doing different things than I usually do. But most of the time, none of this will actually work. What to do then? When absolutely nothing I can do can drum up some feelings of inspiration, what I do is I choose a project that is just for practice. The goal of these sorts of projects is only to learn something new or to develop a skill. Then, it's not all that important if the project gets finished or not, since the goal isn't a portfolio piece. But the net result is I've developed a skill that I will be using over and over again in my portfolio in the future. Maybe it's modeling or rigging or sculpting or compositing or something like that. It's good to keep a list of your strengths and your weaknesses, so when you're doing stuff just for practice, you can focus on the stuff you don't usually work on or the stuff you don't like to work on. Because you're going to be doing the stuff you like on your passion projects, because that's what you like to do anyways. Practice work isn't meant for anyone else to see, so there's no pressure to make it look good. And because it's practice, there's no expectation for it to be fun or easy. It's always expected that it will be difficult, boring, and slow. So it isn't as frustrating when it turns out to be difficult, boring, and slow. And by the time you've forced yourself to just grit your teeth and do it, you might find yourself more interested in the task than you thought you would be. When I talk about this, I like to use the analogy of an outfielder in a baseball game. The outfield is such a boring place, especially if you have a good enough pitcher to strike the other guy out consistently. The temptation is to become complacent and quit paying attention. But if you stop watching the game and get distracted, what's going to happen when the batter hits the ball? It's going to give them a home run after it crashes into your head and gives you a concussion. Now, inspiration is like the baseball, and the artist has to watch for it and be ready for it. Like the baseball player, the artist must work hard off the field to be prepared for the game. That means sweat. It means getting dirty, doing repetitive drills, and training. What good is an outfielder that always sees the ball coming but never manages to catch it? Or an outfielder that always catches the ball but can't throw it far enough to reach the base? Similarly, the artist must be diligent, even in the boring time that doesn't really matter. If you don't work through the time of uninspiration, you won't be ready when inspiration comes. You aren't worthy of it. You're destined to fail because failure is the only thing you've prepared yourself for. You have to practice until your ability is equal to your good taste. Otherwise, you'll always get ideas for things that you aren't good enough to succeed at. Well, in truth, you'll always be inspired to work on something that's a little too hard. It's actually a good thing, too, since it keeps things interesting and forces you to continue improving yourself. It's one of the strange blessings of being an artist. The harder you work to make yourself capable of achieving your vision, the clearer and more vivid your vision will become. It's hard to be sure when you've really found your voice, so to speak, so it's best to forget about vague terms like that. Instead, focus on the next milestone, and you'll soon find that your voice is really a chorus of voices composed together in harmony. Perhaps I'll talk about this at greater length in a future video, since I have quite a few things to say about developing one's aesthetic taste. Anyhow, that's all for this week. I hope you'll like the video, maybe even stick around for the next one. And please leave a comment. I love answering comments. Thanks again.